What I'm about to share with you is something that has lingered in the back of my mind for years, refusing to fade no matter how much time has passed. It isn't a memory I treasure or look back on with fondness. Rather, it's one that has left a deep and indelible mark on me, a scar that no amount of growing up or forgetting could erase. This moment is seared into my consciousness, not because of its joy or warmth, but because of the unease and fear it brought with it. Back in middle school, I wasn't what you would call a social butterfly. I didn't have a large circle of friends. The few I did have were a peculiar bunch, each with their own quirks and oddities. But honestly, I wasn't much different. Together we created a small, tight-knit group. Chris, Jake, Ben and me. We were the kind of friends who thought we'd stick together no matter what, imagining our bond was unbreakable. Yet, with the benefit of hindsight, I now realize that even then, subtle cracks were forming, hints of the distances that would one day grow between us. That summer, Chris surprised us with an invitation that seemed almost too good to be true. His family had a vacation home nestled deep in the Adirondacks, far from the bustling world we knew. It was a secluded cabin surrounded by endless woods, the kind of place you might imagine reading about in a suspense novel. Until he extended the invite, none of us had even known this cabin existed. His family had always been a little different, to say the least. But their eccentricity wasn't something we questioned too much back then. It was just another quirky part of Chris's life, one we didn't fully understand and didn't bother trying to. That trip, however, would show me just how little I knew about my friends, or myself. The journey to the cabin was far from the fun-filled adventure I had envisioned. For starters, I had come down with a nasty cold that left me sneezing every few minutes, my runny nose a constant source of annoyance for everyone in the car. Chris's dad, a man who took cleanliness to obsessive levels, made no effort to hide his irritation. Every time I sniffled or reached for a tissue, his eyes would dart toward me in the rearview mirror, a glare of pure disapproval that only added to my discomfort. As if that wasn't enough, Ben and I couldn't stop bickering over the pettiest things. Every mile of that long, arduous drive felt heavier than the last, and by the time we finally arrived, I wasn't looking forward to the trip at all. All I wanted was a quiet moment to collect myself and escape the oppressive atmosphere in the car. The cabin itself was a paradox, a place that was both charming and unsettling. It was small, almost cozy, with rustic wooden beams and a picturesque setting that might have seemed idyllic under different circumstances. But there was something about it, something I couldn't quite put into words, that felt off. It was as though the cabin existed in its own little world, detached from everything else, and that isolation carried an almost suffocating weight. The dense forest surrounding us didn't help. It felt alive, as though the trees themselves were keeping silent watch over us. No matter where I stood or what I did, I couldn't shake the sense that we were being observed, and not in a comforting way. In those first few moments, standing outside that cabin and looking into the shadowy woods, I felt the first prickling of unease, an unease that would only grow as the days went on. Our days at the cabin started off carefree, or at least they seemed to. We spent hours biking through the winding forest trails, laughing, teasing, and racing one another to see who could reach the end first. The dense woods seemed endless, a labyrinth of green shadows and rustling leaves that muffled the outside world. It was exhilarating in a way, just us and the wild, free from rules and the humdrum routine of home. Yet, even as I tried to let myself get lost in the fun, there was a gnawing sensation at the edges of my thoughts, an unease I couldn't quite explain. I brushed it off as nerves or homesickness, but deep down, I knew it was something more. On the second day, that unease started to solidify. My favorite Yankees cap, the one I wore almost everywhere, went missing. I'd taken it off for just a moment after we returned from the creek, setting it on the cabin's porch while we unpacked. But when I went back to grab it, it was gone. At first, I thought someone was playing a joke, but no one owned up to it. Chris casually suggested I'd left it by the creek, but I knew better. I remembered tucking it under my arm before we left, certain I'd brought it back. The idea that I might have misplaced it nagged at me all afternoon, but the growing frustration was nothing compared to what happened later. That evening, as we were unwinding, I realized another treasured item was missing, a pen from my small but beloved collection. It wasn't just any pen. It was one of my favorites, a sleek blue one I'd bought at a souvenir shop during a family trip. My pen collection was my pride and joy, a quirky little hobby that brought me comfort in its predictability. Losing that pen felt like losing a part of myself. But unlike with the cap, I didn't make a scene. After the fuss I'd caused earlier, I was too embarrassed to draw more attention, especially with Chris's dad around. His stern glares had been enough to keep me quiet. Instead, I swallowed my disappointment and went to bed early, hoping the next day would be better. That night, however, was anything but restful. I'd fallen asleep quickly, exhaustion from the day's activities pulling me under. But sometime around 3 a.m., I woke with a start. For a moment, I thought it was just my restless mind playing tricks on me. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it was almost drowned out by the rustling of leaves outside. My heart raced as I froze in place, straining to hear. It was barely audible, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was whispering. The sound seemed to be coming from Jake's bed across the room, but I couldn't be certain. The shadows of the room played tricks on my eyes, and my pounding heartbeat drowned out the faint murmurs. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to even breathe too loudly, terrified of revealing that I was awake. Minutes dragged on like hours until, at some point, I must have drifted back into a fitful sleep. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it had been a dream, a figment of my overactive imagination fed by the tension of the last 2 days. We fell back into our usual routine, riding bikes and playing games. Things almost felt normal until Jake left to use the bathroom. The three of us continued horsing around in the yard, laughing as if nothing was wrong. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My gaze shifted to the cabin, where a figure stood in the upstairs window. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized Jake, staring blankly down at us. At first, I thought nothing of it, until the realization hit me like a thunderclap. The cabin didn't have an upstairs bathroom. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. That evening, I pretended to feel sick again, opting to stay behind while the others went to dinner. Alone in the cabin, the silence was deafening. My thoughts raced as I pieced together everything that had happened, the whispers, the missing items, Jake's strange behavior. My hands trembled as I crept toward Jake's belongings, compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity. What I found made my stomach churn. Hidden in his bag was my Yankees cap, along with the missing pen and a handful of other personal items I hadn't even realized were gone yet. But it didn't end there. Beneath the stolen items was something far more chilling, a notebook. Its cover was plain, nondescript, but the weight of it in my hands felt ominous. My fingers hesitated as I flipped it open, unaware that what I was about to uncover would change everything. For a moment I stood frozen, notebook in hand, debating whether to open it. A part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend it didn't exist, but curiosity gnawed at me. What could possibly be inside that Jake had hidden so carefully? My hands trembled as I flipped open the cover, revealing pages filled with dark, violent imagery. The drawings were crude yet disturbingly vivid, but my horror deepened as I turned each page. These weren't just random sketches. Among the terrible images, I started noticing something familiar. Faces, clothing, objects. My breath caught when I saw a sketch of someone unmistakably resembling me. The details were chilling. My favorite Yankees cap, my glasses, even the way my hair fell over my forehead. But it wasn't just the likeness that froze my blood. It was the scene itself. In the drawing, I was nailed to a crucifix, my legs severed at the knees, my face contorted in a grimace of agony. Blood dripped from jagged lines, pooling at the base of the cross. The imagery was unbearable, but what truly made my stomach turn was the message scrawled on the final page. In jagged, uneven letters, it read, "I'll make it happen tomorrow." Panic consumed me as the meaning of those words sank in. Was Jake planning to hurt me? Or worse? The air in the cabin suddenly felt suffocating, the walls pressing in around me. I couldn't keep this to myself. I sprinted outside, clutching the notebook, and found Chris's dad by the fire pit. My words tumbled out in a frantic rush as I handed him the notebook. He looked skeptical at first, but as he began flipping through the pages, his face drained of color. By the time he reached the last page, his hands were shaking. Without saying a word, he snapped the notebook shut and called everyone inside. Within minutes, he announced that the trip was over. "Family emergency," he said, his voice tight, his eyes darting nervously between Jake and me. None of us questioned him. We packed up in silence, the once carefree atmosphere shattered. During the drive home, the tension was unbearable. Chris and Ben sat quietly, clearly sensing that something was wrong. But Jake's demeanor was unnerving. He sat in the back seat beside me, unnervingly calm, his gaze boring into the side of my face. I could feel his eyes on me the entire ride, but I didn't dare look back. When we finally reached home, I wasted no time telling my parents everything. I showed them the notebook, my words tumbling out as I relived every moment of the last few days. Their reaction was immediate. My dad called the police, who came to the house within the hour. They took the notebook as evidence, and officers questioned me about everything I'd seen and experienced. Jake's family was notified, and within days they packed up and moved away. I never saw him again, but the fear he left behind never truly disappeared. Years passed, and I did my best to put the incident behind me. Life moved on. College, jobs, new friendships. I told myself it was over, that Jake was just a disturbed kid and I had nothing to worry about. But last week, all those fears came rushing back. A letter arrived at my apartment unmarked except for my name scrawled on the front. Inside was a single sentence: "I remember everything." Alongside it was something that made my heart stop. A pen. Not just any pen, but the pen Jake had stolen from me all those years ago, the one I thought I'd never see again. Since then, I've been living in a state of constant paranoia. Every creak of the floorboards feels like a footstep. Every shadow in the corner of my vision sends a shiver down my spine. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that Jake is out there somewhere waiting for the right moment. What would you do if you were in my shoes? How do you stop a nightmare that refuses to end?